Welcome back to the Kingdom of Hyrule. We have bats, we have wolves, we have floating water blocks, and we have beds. Lots and lots of beds. Welcome back to another DaAcorn video. This time I'm going to be listing my top 10 most used echoes in the Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. Obviously this list is likely to look a little different from other players, though I'm sure a couple of these made it pretty high for all of us for obvious reasons. I just thought it would be cool to instead see a list of the 10 I personally used the most, good or not, backed up by cold hard facts. If you haven't sunk your time into a playthrough of the newest entry in the Zelda franchise, here's your chance to back out, because even though I'll only be talking about the collectible echoes of the game, that may be enough to ruin some cool surprises for some of you. To start off this list, I'd like to bring your attention to the most combative monster you can add to your ranks, the Lionel. Now, despite being a 6-cost echo which restricts it from being used until practically the end game, the Lionel still managed to break my top 10. This is for two main reasons. One, it just outclasses every monster in pure damage output, and two, I had yet to do the Slumber Dojo challenges, which allowed me to use the Lionel a lot. Its mobility is incredible, being able to jump up and rush enemies very quickly, plus it has tons of health which allows it to stick around far longer than your average bokoblin, something I can't say for most of the other echoes on this list. One of the best things about the Lionel, however, is how its sword can hit multiple times within a single swing. Couple that with its massive health, and you have an easy answer to a room full of a random assortment of monsters. Technically, it's Fire Key specifically that takes this spot, but I thought it would be best to take the opportunity to talk about all types of keys, especially since all 4 of them made it pretty high on my list, all for similar reasons. The regular keys is found super early in the game and is a great pick for firepower when all you're dealing with at that point are Bzols and the odd moblin, but the real fun begins when you start to unlock the other versions of the bat. The fire, ice, and electric keys will become and remain the cheapest form of elemental warfare at your disposal. Not to even mention how useful it is for them to be airborne. Using Zelda's aiming is a pretty effective way to deal elemental damage from a distance, and they're basically required to beat a couple of the bosses in the game, even though the Wizrobes you can capture around the overworld do eventually become the better choice for pure offense. The keys do still remain the much cheaper option to spam, not to mention the gliding capabilities of them as well. I'm not much of a manual reader, so when it came to the enemies of Zelda, I learned a lot of their names through this game. Imagine my surprise learning that this monstrosity of an enemy is named the Pea Hat. If I knew this thing's name as a kid, I don't think I would have been nearly as terrified of it the first time I entered Hyrule Field in Ocarina of Time. You can find a cave with the Pea Hat directly after finishing the first dungeon, the Southern Ruins. Since you're likely still on 4 or 5 hearts at this point, I'd recommend practicing caution around it. It's surprisingly quick, and its spinning spikes can kill you faster than you can say, damn, I just got killed by something called a Pea Hat. It's a 3-try cost, but well worth it for the early game. It was my go-to in most combat scenarios, and it's even no slouch when you finally upgrade it to the point where you can spawn 3 at once, absolutely overwhelming everything you set it against. This strategy of multiple spinning enemies overwhelming your targets is not a strategy unique to the Pea Hat, however, as our next echo follows a similar path while also being a bit of a tank. Much further into the game, roughly about halfway, we come across the Ball and Chain Trooper. Now this guy is an absolute beast of an enemy. It's armoured, giving it quite a lot of staying power, and its spinning mace gives it some immediate damage when spawning it directly next to an enemy. It's not as quick movement-wise like the Pea Hat, but the sheer damage output more than makes up for that. Plus, you can always just move Zelda closer and respawn the trooper again. Fully upgrading your Tri-Rod can allow you to spawn 2 of these guys at once, and in some specific circumstances, I'd say the DPS potential for 2 of these troopers going ham into an enemy can rival and even outclass a Lionel. Like, sure, the Lionel does have the added benefit of being able to work solo, without you really having to tell it what to do that often, but if you have the patience to keep repositioning your echoes, these guys cannot go wrong. Bombs are a staple of practically every Zelda game. Whether it's to find hidden passages, throw at enemies, or as an alternate fast travel method, the bomb is as synonymous with the franchise as the bow and arrow. So to find out that you don't unlock bombs until like 2/3 through the game, and can only use them in sword fighter mode, nah, that's just silly. Lucky for us, we can get a substitute much earlier in the game. As early as the 2nd dungeon, if you picked correctly and went to the Zora before the Gerudo, we can get the elusive Bombfish, which for our purposes will work perfectly fine as a bomb replacement. Spawning it and then immediately grabbing it with Tri, we can maneuver the Bombfish wherever we please under a small time limit. It can get a little jumpy sometimes, it is a living thing after all, which, now that I think about it, the life cycle of a Bombfish is kinda screwed up. What a sad existence. Of course, the echoes in Echoes of Wisdom are essentially taking the place of the typical dungeon items we are used to seeing in classic Zelda titles. Though I feel the amount of echoes did lean a little too heavy on the straight up monster types, there are still a few that feel like they have a little more to offer than just their fighting hands. The keys having elemental properties, as well as of course the bombfish, come to mind. But before getting the fire keys in the game, I had to settle for the Ignol. I can't remember off the top of my head how early you can get the fire keys, because I was repping the fire version of the Zol for what felt like most of the game, whenever I needed to light a torch or melt some ice, which was often enough to bump this blob up to number 5. The Ignol is found around the same time as the Pea Hat, and I think is the earliest you can get any sort of elemental power. Burning strong monsters from a distance is a pretty good way to stall their health out when you're pretty low yourself. I remember most moblin camps, I would just chuck a single Ignol into the grass and their entire crew would be up in flames in seconds. Even though more options for fire do pop up, it was always pretty easy to rip one of these guys out when I needed to. The cloud is discovered fairly late in the game at Hebra Mountain, and it will make all your vertical related dreams come true. It's a platform that can be spawned without the need for any foundation below it, and so they can be used virtually endlessly to go up given you have the space to do so. The main drawback being that you can't stand on them for very long at all, as you'll fall through and your progress will be lost. With some tidy footwork, it ends up just being a better bed, as long as you can deal with that little time limit that's held against you. I've become pretty accustomed to how the bed worked spatially and whatnot at this point, so even though the cloud did come in handy for some big overworld cliffs, and trust me, I used it enough for it to make it this high, I think it just came a little too late to be in my top 3. I do think it's kind of funny how you could potentially get this echo in either the 5th dungeon or the 7th, which is honestly pretty insane to think about when some players would be going without this truly game-changing echo for 2 whole dungeons. Now this is my highest used monster echo in the entire game. I can explain. When I first unlocked the level 1 variant, I initially ruled it out as a weak, unruly enemy to use as an echo. Aiming it was far too much of a pain, and it just felt like it took too long to take down some of the tougher enemies I was beginning to face. After unlocking its level 2 upgrade, and a little convincing from my brother, I quickly changed my mind on this little guy. The aiming is still pretty bad, as it will bounce just about anywhere but where you need it to go. However, when the cost is down and you get the ability to spam it, it can do some real damage. The spamming is probably the main reason why it's so high on my list, as I'd often keep spawning it to keep it on track to deal damage. It's an aggressive and resilient echo that definitely deserves the spotlight, despite the nature of how I used it being the main reason why it made it so far up. The Old Bed, one of the first echoes you get in the game, and one that will stick with you until the very end. This is the echo of the game, the poster child for the entire mechanic. It even got its own profile picture. This was the echo that Nintendo pushed throughout all the marketing for the game, and for good reason. Using an object as mundane as a bed as stairs in a game that revels in vertical travel just communicates everything you need to know about the design of this game. It's funny and useful. With a single try at max level, you can stack an entire 6-bed legion on top of each other for the ultimate stairway. It does bother me how easy some monsters can dismantle all your hard work, but that doesn't do a lot to understate just how much use every player got out of the bed. Even though in some ways there are a couple echoes that in my opinion do outclass this one, its simplicity and reliable nature should be enough to keep it pretty far up on your most used list. Plus it can be used to heal you if you choose to sleep in it. A little bonus for an already exceptional echo. Now for some honourable mentions. Some echoes that didn't make it onto my most used list, but I really just wanted to talk about anyway. The level 3 variants of the Sword Moblin, Lizalfos, and Darknut are all very good combative echoes. Expensive, but at the point of unlocking them, there really isn't anything like them. The only problem is, by the time you do unlock these guys, you are honestly not that far off unlocking and being able to use the Lionel, which slightly edges out all of the pros of this trio. I suppose the Lizalfos can still operate underwater, which is somewhat useful in some specific circumstances. All 3 cost 5 tries and do not go down. So at that point, wouldn't you rather spawn a stronger enemy, or 2 slightly weaker ones that together make up for it? Much like the Caramadillo, the level 1 version of this kinda sucked in my eyes, and the second one I didn't even bother trying. Once again, my brother chimed in to speak the word of Mothula level 2, promising great aerial combat with strong resilience. When I finally got around to actually using it, yeah, he was kinda right. This echo is pretty good. Probably should be your go-to airborne assaulter. Too late for it to make my most used list, unfortunately, but maybe in the next file. Zelda's bed can be used as a platforming and for healing, but its cost of 3 makes the platform strategy less than stellar. The healing capabilities are still there, and even better than the old or even the other bed variants. So good that stocking up on healing smoothies feels kinda like a waste of time if you can just sleep in the middle of a battle. Pair this with the pajamas and you'll heal far more than you'll ever lose. It honestly feels like cheating. Much like the bomb fish replaces bombs, the whole meal is your shovel in this game. You'll more than likely use it from time to time to dig up the might crystals, among other things. So being as this is yet another classic Zelda item replacement, I thought it logical to bring it up here. Just watch this. Yeah, it may not be useful everywhere, but desert travel has never been so quick. Thankfully, I never had to grind money during my playthrough, but if I had to, I would be very glad that the crow exists. The automaton version of the crow is the far better way to go rupee farming, but either way, I thought it was well worth bringing up in the honourable mentions. Now for a couple dishonourable mentions. Echoes that I didn't use at all, or, I don't know, once or twice. I know for most of the monster echoes, they're capable of damaging and defeating enemies, but the Genies are so slow I never use them. What's hilarious is that the only time you have to use the Genie is to unlock a secret room that has, you guessed it, the Genie level 2, which I also didn't use. Mostly because that was the final echo I got in the game, but still, these ones kinda suck. Now look, I will admit that the spiked roller can come in handy for the Mango minigame, but I unlocked it after I did all that, so for my purposes this roller served me null. It rarely even fits when you want it to spawn, and it just kinda doesn't really help that much. Apart from the Mango minigame, it does seem like it may have been tailor-made for that game specifically. Whether it's the Albatroll, Beacon, or Gwei, if the bird isn't a crow, all I can think about is how I'm not seeing any financial returns on my investments when I spawn any of these guys. Okay, this is it everyone, my most used echo in my entire 100% playthrough of The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. If you haven't figured it out through process of elimination, then I present to you the water block. This echo was my bread and butter whenever I hit a roadblock in this game, and it felt like 80% of the time the water block would be the solution. Well, maybe it wasn't hardly the solution, but it would brute force me through them regardless. Though the water block does require foundation unlike the cloud, that foundation doesn't necessarily have to be below it. The water block can be attached to a wall, and better yet, spawning a water block within an already existing one will just push the block up. Everything about how this echo works is just awesome. The versatility when using it to navigate steep cliffs or tight cavernous areas is nothing to scoff at. I'm not at all surprised that this echo is at the top of my most used list. You get it fairly early as well if you choose to do the Zora quest, and it remained number 1 for virtually my entire playthrough. I wouldn't even be surprised if it actually had quite a lead on the old bed. Whenever I get around to playing another file of this game, part of me wants to ban the use of the water block, just because of how broken it is. I'm sure there'll be a few places where I'm forced to use it, but I think it would be interesting to see what other solutions I'd need to rely on if I can't use the water block as an all-encompassing crutch. So there you have it, my top 10 most used echoes in my file of Echoes of Wisdom. I hope it goes without saying, but I'd love to see your lists down in the comments below. So bust out your Switch, go to the most used tab, and let me know down below. Did you guys use any echoes I didn't mention in this list, or are we all living the water block life? If you guys want to see some more Zelda content from me, I'd also love to hear your thoughts on that. Anyway, enough waffle. Please like and subscribe if you're new here, and are liking what you're watching. And I'll see you next time when you hopefully choose to watch DaAcorn.